would.
I'm kind of, right now, I'm looking for old-time music stuff. Sure, I would do that. I don't know. I've never gone to a karaoke in my life.
Great. So I think this is going to be it. I don't think anybody else is coming, although anybody else wants to come. And you are new here, so welcome. I'm sorry I didn't catch your name.
My name's Renee.
Renee, nice to meet you. My name is Leela. Leela Yoder, I'm the manager here.
I'm Katie.
My name's Rodney.
Might have a few come and drift in.
All right, well, that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. All right, so who wants to go first? You want to just go around the table?
Anybody have a book or a movie, TV series they'd like to talk about that they enjoyed recently?
I'd like to know what this book is about, if anybody's read it.
Well, I'm more than halfway through, and it is a movie too.
Mhm.
It's written through the eyes of a man. Edith Wharton won a Pulitzer Prize.
Right, I'm familiar with that name.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's even a book out there on the free things, Edith Wharton abroad. And so it starts in the late 1870s in New York. And so this man is of the upper crust, and he's very, very concerned about doing everything right. He knows that's what it's, really all about. He sees people through that lens. He does things through that particular lens, even to the point of going, I'm not going to say too much, okay, going through with a marriage that it wouldn't have been his first choice because of that. And if you saw the movie, then you know a little bit more. But,
Now, we're gonna discuss this next time,
right, I'm just filling her on that, because you can still get it and read it in time or peruse it or whatever. I'm a little bit more.
But she's halfway through it.
A little more than halfway through it.
Yeah.
So what I liked about it was her description of New York in the late 1870s and some of the some of the first families from that era. One question I had was the names that she gave, were they real names of these first families, or were they just clever, imitations? But I like that because she's going back a little bit in time before the 1870s and a little bit background. And so there's the new rich and the later rich and those lived over here and these lived over there. And then there's the artists. They were kind of looked down, the bohemian artists and all that. And so to me, it's like she's saying he's overly concerned with those things because it goes forward in time and society has literally changed. I won't give you any more on that, but I did enjoy the movie. In the movie, the narrator is the voice of Edith Wharton.
Oh, really?
Through, not literally, but the book, through one of the older women characters. So I thought.
Because what time period? She's not alive anymore, right? Edith
No.
Wharton.
It said 1870s.
So she's very
This was written about 1925 or so.
Okay, so she's really writing in the context of her life. Back,
Before,
but not so much.
Right, exactly, because where it ends up is pretty much the present time that she lived.
Okay. Cool.
So I have a couple movies I'd like to talk about.
All right, go ahead.
That I've seen recently. They may not all be extremely recent, but where I've seen them recently. One was called Weiner. It's a documentary from events that happened about 10 to 11 years or to 12 years ago. And it's kind of nostalgic, like for the good old days, because it's very weird and bizarre political story, but it's compared to now, it's kind of like the good old days, like if that was the worst problem. So, and you may or may not be familiar, I'm not saying you're not, or I'm not saying you aren't, but there was this congressman, very successful congressman named Anthony Weiner.
Oh, I know all about him.
And so.
Certainly read about him.
Right, so anyway, he was very successful. I mean, he was a brilliant orator. He was prominent, he fought for the underdog. He just had it all. I mean, he had a beautiful wife who was pregnant at the time. She was a political staffer herself. You know, I mean, for what they were and what they wanted, they had it all, right? And so that was the age of the iPhones, or you know, and all that. So, and I know you already know the story, but I'm going to say it real quickly so that helped me get the bigger picture. So, women started getting pictures of his private part, like he had his underwear on, you know, but. And at first he denied it. They proved it was true. Then, okay. Fall from grace. Happened 1 or 2 times at that point. Don't quote me. So he wasn't reelected to Congress. Then it's like the underdog comes back. He's running for mayor of New York. All right, you know, we believe in redemption. His wife was behind him. What more could you ask for? He was ahead by 60 points. That was his to lose.
Yeah,
Then what happened?
yeah,
It happened again.
I know.
You know. And so then they spun it around a little bit. What I found fascinating, his staff was just aghast. His wife was aghast. I mean, the expressions on her face leave no doubt as to the horror. But what I found interesting in watching it again was his reactions were so bizarre and out in left field, and I really got that this time. Okay, so as it continued to happen, they would spin it, but then they stopped spinning it. They said, no, you're flying solo on this one. And for instance, he goes on MSNBC, and the guy says, what is wrong with you? And so what that showed to me is that you cannot shame a person, you cannot embarrass a person, you cannot do anything to a person like that to get them to change if they have what I would consider to be a personality disorder. And the way Anthony fought back, he was loving it.
He was loving the criticism,
He was loving the fight.
the fight.
That guy
Yes, that's
showed
what he
him, and
does.
so then later he was watching it with his wife on the computer, you know, that show, and he's like, whoa!
I did not see that interview.
And his wife was like, I just cannot believe
She
this.
finally got it, that there was something seriously wrong.
I think she knew, she didn't, you know, I mean, she didn't want to jump out of the marriage, she had a son on the way, but
Yeah,
Eventually-
he seemed to love the spotlight.
Yeah.
And the worse.
That's right, he was
did to
loving
get
the
into
attention
the
where he should have
spotlight,
been
almost
horrified
like
by it.
positive reinforcement.
His wife was horrified by it, his staff was horrified by it, his voters were horrified by it.
Maybe he was in
So
the shock
finally-
effect or something.
So I'm just gonna sum it up right now and then, so that eventually he sent pictures to a 15-year-old. Boom,
Right, that was
Prison.
it. And, yeah,
lose everything,
right,
divorce, but they still maintain a relationship for their sake of their son. He's now a radio show podcast type person. And I believe she still works in staff or, you know, I mean, it's not a shadow on her.
It's kind of like a documentary on how a person can self-destruct.
Mhm, yeah, and
in the
so,
book, do they deal with his mental health issues?
what book?
Oh,
Oh, it's a documentary.
a documentary,
yeah.
do they deal with his mental health issues in the documentary?
Well, a person can only, you know, if a person feels they need help, they can seek out. But with personality disorders, it's usually the people around them that are suffering.
So when
He
he
never
went,
thought he had a
when
problem.
he went to prison, that it wasn't dealt with there?
They didn't
go
get, yeah,
beyond that?
it was kind of winding up at that
Yeah.
point.
I always wondered what became of him, because I didn't
Yeah.
follow it, I just was like, oh boy.
So
you know,
he
this is
served his time,
wrong.
he got out, he's divorced, and he's on a radio show.
Well, I get up
Really?
early in the morning, middle of the night actually, and I get the New York radio stations, CBS and ABC, and I think he was at a talk show on ABC. Did you say it was him or his son that had the talk show?
It's a podcast. I mean, I can't really give the exact
Yeah,
details.
I remember them saying late at night that he was on, he was either a co-host or a guest host or a guest you
right.
know, regularly on the station, but that was a long time ago.
So the moral of the story is he lost everything, and it's y'all's fault.
Really, really.
Yeah, a person with a personality disorder or a narcissist will never accept responsibility, because he said this is a private matter, because he said he never met up with the women, he never did anything with those women. That was his story. So,
Right.
Well, that's become a whole society trait, you know,
Right.
affixing guilt and avoiding responsibility is now
narcissism.
the American pastime almost.
So, anybody else got something they want to say?
Well, I don't see movies and I don't have a TV, so I can't contribute much.
It's not just books, and it's
Yeah,
books and
books,
movies.
movies, any type of, last time we discussed a couple of TV shows, documentaries, anything like that.
Oh, one final thought on Weiner. My one question was, and I don't think I want to know the answer, is he still doing it?
I had that same thought when you said that he was out.
Did he ever get cured, or, they didn't,
Did
yeah, I
he ever
kind of
figure out,
ended
did he
there.
ever figure out that he didn't want to spend the rest of his life in jail?
Yeah, for the
Well, I haven't
15-year-old.
read much lately either, I guess.
So how about you? Do you have a
Yes,
You're a librarian.
I came prepared a fiction book and a nonfiction book. That I really enjoyed recently was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin.
When tomorrow was what?
The title is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow.
Okay.
And
And tell us how you came upon the book, why you,
well, it was a new book that we got in our library, and I think I had seen it in some type of recommendation list online of like top books of the year or something of that nature. I don't remember exactly, but I was just sort of looking for something to read, and I thought, okay, well, that looks interesting. And it was a really interesting story. I would be very interested to do this one as a book club book, because I'd kind of like to discuss it with other people. But the basic plot, and it is one of those that moves around in time a little bit. I know Ms. Renee is new, but it's a recurring theme at book discussions, that books that move around in time or that are not in purely chronological order, not everyone likes those. It's mostly chronological order, but not entirely. So there are these two college students who are both aspiring video game developers. And they get
Female?
it's a man and a woman, and then later a third person, another man, kind of comes in and joins them. But it's mostly the first man and woman, and they are aspiring video game developers. They get together, they develop a game, it becomes a huge hit, they start their own company, they become wildly successful. The business kind of starts to take a strain on their friendship as they want different things. There's flashbacks to when they met as kids. They met as kids when the young man was in the hospital. And this girl came and kind of ran into him in the hospital, and then they became friends and started visiting. But what he didn't know was that she was getting community service credit for visiting him.
Oh, that's dicey.
Not to get too much on a soapbox, don't ever do that.
bad
Don't ever, like, visit a sick or disabled person for community service. It is very dehumanizing. So, of course, because it is very dehumanizing, as soon
It
as...
depends on how bad they need a visitor.
You mean just do it because you want to, but stay away from the prison people? Is that?
Well, no, I'm not, it wasn't prison, it was for her, bat mitzvah. You know, like, and, you know, like a,
Boy Scout.
Or at least tell them.
and yeah.
Merit badge.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. So of course, because it's very dehumanizing, as soon as he finds out about it, they have a big fight, they don't speak for years, they run into each other years later when they're grown up, they're college students, and they're both aspiring video game developers. And it goes through their lives from when they start their company, and they're pretty young, they're like 20, 21 when they start their company, and then it moves forward in time, and then it ends when they're like 35 or something.
The book ends when
The
you're
book
35.
ends, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I'm not doing a good job of describing it. It's mostly about their friendship and how they feel, connected to each other, but also they want different things, and they fight and they reconcile and they collaborate and they work against each other, and it's just this very tumultuous friendship. I was extremely compelled by this story.
Don't you think it sounds like family?
Yeah, it's very,
It sounds a little mellow.
yeah, it does. It's not really written that way.
So
I
it
think
goes forward, but it doesn't jump around in time.
it doesn't jump around in time. It does. There are flashbacks.
Could you tell? Recommending, are we at the stage where we're considering the book to choose?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Usually we just go
You're
around
just-
and
You're just
discuss and
telling us what you
recommend.
read, right?
And then, yeah, usually we go around and discuss and recommend, and then, and then at the end, we pick next month's book club. I would really like to discuss this in a book club setting. There is a part where the characters are flawed people. They make a lot of choices so that, as the reader, why are you making that choice?
Oh, that's why you want to talk about it.
Uh-huh. And near the end, one of the main characters expresses an opinion that is absolutely morally reprehensible. And it's in character because she's a flawed person. I'm not saying that Gabrielle Zevin is condoning the point of view of her character. But I did think it was interesting that it's never addressed either in the book or in any of the reviews,
Oh,
or it just kind of left hanging there. And I really want to talk to somebody about why this character. I understand why the character would believe something, this morally reprehensible thing, but
You do.
it's not what she did. It's an opinion that she expresses. I don't want to spoil it because it's near the end, but it's like really bad. So yeah, I thought this was interesting. I think it would make a good book club book. I think there's a lot of characterization and character choices that we can analyze. It's not really a conventional story.
how's the voice in the book? Is it a pleasant voice to listen to or to read, does it flow? The
Yes.
author's voice?
Yes. I read it and also listened to part of it on audiobook. And yes, I think it's a pleasant voice. There's a part where there's a shooting, and there's a character who has been shot and is in the hospital and is kind of on his deathbed and is kind of flickering in and out of consciousness, in and out of delirium, and it's just one of the most beautifully written scenes that I've read. So definitely highly. I'm not always good at describing things, so I'm not good at saying like it's it's good. She writes well. The characters are interesting. The characters are very painfully realistic. The scenarios are interesting.
It would be an interesting movie, probably.
I think it probably would. Yeah.
So tell me the author's name again.
Gabrielle Zevin. You want to take a look at it?
Is it on your Libby? Is it on Libby?
I believe it. Yes, it is on Libby, and we have the physical copy to check out. And I also brought a nonfiction book that's a little bit of an offbeat choice. A Sentimental Education by Hannah McGregor.
The bird.
It's a needlepoint, and this odd background of how I came across this. Hannah McGregor is a podcaster who does a podcast about the Harry Potter books, where she analyzes them through the lens of different schools of literary criticism. And if you're me, that is extremely fascinating. I'm aware that maybe not for everyone, but like going way, way too in depth into like young adult books is completely my jam. And so that was how I got on the radar of Hannah McGregor. And this book is kind of memoir, part analysis of how we think about reading, what reading books, what role literature plays in society, what underlying assumptions and messages are in common literature, because she is an actual literature professor, not just a podcaster. Probably should have led with that. And it's very interesting. One point that she makes that really was thought-provoking for me is I had always thought, and I don't even remember explicitly being taught this, it was just kind of pervasive in the culture, that reading fiction increases people's empathy. Right? That's kind of like a thing that we say, oh, people should read books because it makes them more empathetic. And I never really questioned this. I always felt like reading made me more empathetic, reading fiction specifically, because you were encouraged to empathize with the characters and a situation different than your own. So I just sort of taken this for granted. Well, of course reading fiction makes you more empathetic. But then Hannah McGregor makes the point that it kind of really doesn't make sense historically, because if that were true, then societies that had like mass literacy earlier would just be way more empathetic societies than societies that maybe didn't invent the printing press or mass literacy as early. That's not really true historically. So at least on a society-wide level, claim that reading fiction boosts empathy. So
Unless you did like a test, scientific,
yeah, right. And there are
What
tests.
about some books increase?
Yeah, there are tests that have
experiment.
the experiments that have suggested that people who have read certain books tend to be more empathetic than people who haven't. But, you know, how significant, like, do we see effects on a society-wide level? And she's saying, not really. So that was kind of a perspective shifting.
Seems like it would depend on, you know, what the book was.
Mhm.
Like you could grow up in a home where you were presented with literature that, you know, espoused hate
Mhm.
or love, you know, I mean, it, you know, it could go either way.
And people are reading less these days. I mean, it'll never be
I know I
nobody.
am.
But,
But
some
I'm not
people
sure
don't read at all.
you can even apply the premise, because, you know, it hadn't been too long ago that, majority of the people didn't read. It was
Exactly.
a recent thing.
Exactly.
And even today, I mean, you're sitting here in this library, I've been in this library a lot, and not a whole lot of people come in and shake books out. You know, I mean, a lot of people don't read today, read fiction, I mean.
Mhm.
I've met
And,
plenty of people from Generation X or whatever they call it, you know, who don't read at all.
Yeah. So how could they be exposed to the fiction to develop the empathy if they're never reading anything? Not reading wide enough,
Yeah,
exposed enough to actually develop the empathy.
that was the purpose of certain types of,
Yeah, and I'm not
Upper
sure you
education's
could develop that through reading anything.
That's true, college education, because they
Sounds
assign books
genetic,
that you
no?
never would have read.
right?
How
on
your
your own.
family's raised and stuff like that will influence more than reading a book. See how it could bleed in, but I don't know, it's kind of a stretch, I guess is what I'm saying.
It could be, yeah. I mean, her point is, if that were true, then we would see effects on like a society-wide scale. That like, as soon as Gutenberg invented the printing press, we would see like everybody become vastly more empathetic, and that's not really what happened. So,
Yeah.
It really isn't.
and yes, and I think that the point that you're making, that mass literacy is very recent in like human history. Like the idea that everybody of all social classes would go to school and learn to read and have access to books is relatively very recent in human history and is not universal. So that's perhaps an unfinished social experiment.
Hey, either one of you have things they'd like to
How
share.
about you?
Hmm.
Are you?
About what?
Do you have a book that you want?
Oh, yeah, well, it occurred to me, being the lone male in the two books that I've been part, that I was here for, so the apothecary and the crawdad thing, written by women, and a lot of the fiction today is written by women, most of it, no doubt. Most of it's read by women, but I was point of view in a man's novel, or at least, and another thing I've noticed, everything's kind of changed over the years.
Do you have a book that you read that you'd like to talk
Yeah,
about?
thank you, I'll get to it in a minute.
Okay.
I was thinking of Franny and Zooey by Salinger, which is only 170 pages.
I read that when I was in college.
Yeah,
What's it called?
yeah,
Franny and Zooey.
it came out in
That
the
was a
late
famous
50s.
book.
Yeah.
That's, you know, our generation, you know what I mean? It's like, I think it's less their generation.
But one good
I
thing
read it,
about it
did you?
is what the books that I've been exposed to in here, they were about two things, there were two plots going. Apothecary, it was the author and her problem with her husband and trying to find out the secret of the apothecary, and then there was the story set in the, what, 1800s was it?
Oh, yeah,
1700s? With the, you know, that story, the real story, and they jumped back and forth. Well, in the Crawdad, you know, that she was always jumping back and forth. There were two stories. There was her on the marsh, and then the murder mystery and the trial and all that, so there were two stories. I think I don't think two stories is working for me. I would like to just have one story, a literal story.
But what
point
would
A
you
to point B.
recommend to anyone
He
of
just
what
did.
you've read?
He did.
Okay,
Say what?
So
What did you say?
you're submitting Franny and Zooey as our book club
Yeah, because
recommendation, yeah.
it's not really from a man's point of view. There's a narrator in there, and he actually addresses the reader a couple of times in the book. But it's a point, it starts, will only last basically one day. So it's just what they're going, the girl's having a breakdown, the brother's trying to help her, the mother doesn't know what to do. It gets in theology, but, you know, he called it a love story, not a theology thing. So it's just an interesting story, and it's written completely different to me than the way he wrote Catcher in the Rye. This is much more sophisticated, much more, you really get he brings the characters right into you.
and who wrote it?
Salinger.
Oh, okay. The same author as Catcher in the Rye.
So I think it'd just be a good change of pace, kind of, get away, you know, get out of story.
There's a movie I'd like to recommend, since you said that, about the author of J.D. Salinger. And I'm trying to think of the name. It was a take on The Catcher in the Rye, but sort of different. And
Which one was that now? I'm sorry, I had trouble hearing.
it wasn't called Catcher in the Rye, but it was about that author. And all I know, Kevin Spacey was in it. He played his college professor. I was really impressed by Kevin Spacey's performance, even though off-screen he's got a lot of shade thrown at him, but, you know, no doubt that's
Yeah, he's a
justified.
good actor.
But he's a good actor, and he was trying to help J.D. Salinger, encourage him, do anything he could for him, because he recognized he was really brilliant. But the way the J.D. Salinger character treated him was like kind of with contempt, the way he viewed the rest of society. So I would recommend that movie just because I really liked Kevin Spacey's performance.
I just thought of something. I just finished listening to something really different. It was called Summer Book, and it was by somebody called Tove Jansson. And I was looking for the Moomin books, which are from Norway, children's books that we don't read here in the USA, although if you search for the Moomin books, you'll see them right away. They're wonderful. But he also wrote this summer book, and the deal is that it's up in Norway, so there's a lot of ocean, and there's islands there, and people have their little islands that they, their cottages on islands that they get away to. But the characters in the book are a young girl who's 6. Her mom died, so she's an orphan, and it's her and her dad on this summer island and her grandmother. And, the thing that's happening is that the little girl is coming into deeper awareness about what's going on around her and the issues with, being a child, being an adult kind of thing. And then there's her grandmother who's leaving this life, not right away, and not even by the end of the book, but she's definitely on her way out. So you have this little girl coming into her sentient awareness about life, and the grandmother leaving, and it's all happening one summer on this island. And, their life is a little funky on the island. The water is tricky. Her dad wants to grow all these botanical flowers on the island, and water's an issue. Her grandmother is struggling with her vision. The problems are just everyday problems, but the arguments that go on in the book between the little girl and the grandmother are so superficial and yet so deep, sometimes. But, so that was just something totally I sort of stumbled into. I was looking for a book for a kid, and I looked up on Hoopla, I looked up his name, the author's name, and instead of coming up with the Moomins, it came up with the summer book. So I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying that it was completely unexpected and different and refreshing, because.
Well, that sounds like recommending it, and-
Well, I'm recommending it to people individually,
Mhm.
but I don't think it has all the nitty-gritty. I don't think it's a very thick book. I think there's a lot of substance there and a little, kind of a sweet story.
Right. So you're recommending it, but not necessarily like as a book club book.
Right, I just thought of it because I really haven't been reading a lot lately because I've just moved here from upstate New York and I've been busy, just with kind of getting adjusted to,
Well,
Georgia.
if you enjoyed it, that's a good recommendation,
well, it was
to
different.
me, yeah.
It's different. And the thing that caught me about it was in the description in Hoopla, it just sort of mentioned that juxtaposition of a young child coming into sentience and a grandmother leaving, and that kind of, that's a dynamic that I don't think about very much. I've certainly experienced it in my life, but
Right, it's a unique perspective.
yeah, I think it is. It
You know,
is.
while we were talking, I happened to think of some books, a couple of books that, well, there were three of them that I knew of. It came out about 8 or 10 years ago. Did you ever read A Man Called Ove?
I did not, no.
Did you ever read another one called, My Grandmother Told Me to Tell You She's Sorry? That was those were great.
I heard that one.
Yeah,
I
they
haven't
were
read it, but I've
great
heard of
books,
it.
man. And then he wrote another one, and I couldn't get into that one too much. They were just so interesting and so well, just, they weren't deep and profound, they were
Yeah.
just, they had a profound kind of theme, and they were it was kind of a mystery as to what was going on exactly, but the Ove book was just fascinating, and it is, I could give you the plot points, but he's kind of a standoffish guy, and his wife gets paralyzed, and then she dies, and the cat comes into it, and the neighbors come into it, and the social people are trying to take the husband and put him in a home, and and all this other stuff, and there's a homosexual who's being rejected by his father, and there's all these things going on. And Ove is kind of above it all, and all he wants to do is kill himself because his wife's dead.
Just wants to be
And he tries to hang himself, the rope breaks, he's gonna poison himself, there's a knock on the door. It is just it's just a really fascinating, kind of captivating, charming, I guess, book. And has anybody ever heard of, I never hear authors anymore, so it kind of got my attention.
Rebel in the Rye, 2017 is the book, the movie.
All right.
that I would
Yeah, I
recommend if you
remember
like,
reading that Salinger
fiction.
took a writing course at NYU, I think it was. And yeah, he didn't get along with or he wasn't enthused with the course and just kind of snubbed his nose at it and went his own way.
Right, and so, yeah, and a lot of writers would be just feel blessed for the opportunities or the things that people were trying to help them with, and he wasn't, so
Yeah,
that
he
was
was kind of,
what really stuck out.
to me, he had kind of a weird childhood. Not,
There's also a recent documentary.
oh, is it?
On
I wish I could see that. I'm kind of a Salinger fan.
So I'm gonna go because I have to make soup from scratch as part of what I'm making tonight. Making broccoli soup from scratch, and he likes it, so I'm gonna make it for him.
All right.
Thanks for coming.
Congratulations. I can't make soup from scratch, so I admire you.
Oh, I cook all the time, that's my deal here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah, and thank you for having it. Yeah, it's
And
nice.
if you wanna check out a copy of The Age of Innocence, we have them up front, and the,
Is it on Libby?
yes, it is on
I'm
Libby.
more likely to listen to it.
Alright, yeah, it's on Libby, and the discussion for that is going, I don't have the date in front of me, but it's the last Thursday of the month.
I think I have it.
Yep, you have it,
on the-
and then recommendation group the following week, so thank you for coming.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I
One
think
book
that's
I
the
would,
27th.
Okay.
a book I would like to recommend for the book club, but it would have to be after the library has purchased it, was the one I talked about.